It was a quiet evening when Noah received the call. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic, barely coherent. "Noah, you have to come. It's Mia. She's gone." Mia, his younger sister, had always been a little too curious for her own good, but this was different. Their childhood home had always had an eerie presence, a strange feeling that settled over the house at night like a thick fog. They'd grown up with stories, whispers of the house's haunted past. Old tales told by their grandmother spoke of the restless spirits who still roamed its halls, but Mia had never been one to believe in such things, until now. Noah's heart raced as he hung up the phone and grabbed his jacket. The unsettling feeling he'd always pushed away began to gnaw at him. The phone call had come from Sarah, Mia's best friend. Sarah's voice trembled with fear, and Noah could hear muffled cries in the background. "We were exploring the woods near the house, and she just disappeared. I don't know what happened." The woods surrounding their family's home had always been off limits, a place shrouded in mystery and superstition. Local legends spoke of ghostly figures, cursed lands, and the shadow of a creature that only appeared under the cover of moonlight. Yet Mia, ever the adventurer, had spent days wandering through those very woods. She had laughed off the warnings, convinced it was all just stories. But now, as Noah drove towards the house, a sickening dread twisted in his gut. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The town had already begun murmuring about strange occurrences in the woods. People said the trees had started whispering, the ground had started to tremble, and the very air seemed to grow heavy with the scent of decay. He arrived at the house just as the sun began to dip behind the horizon. The once welcoming, rustic structure now stood like a dark silhouette against the dimming sky. The windows, once bright with warmth, now seemed like eyes staring out into the abyss. Noah approached Sarah, who was standing by the porch, her face pale and drenched in tears. "I don't know what happened," she sobbed. "We were only out there for an hour." And then she broke off, her voice faltering. "I turned around and she was gone. It was like something took her." A chill ran down Noah's spine. He knew the woods well, but this was different. He could feel it in the air, the change, the malevolent force that had begun to stir. And as the wind howled through the trees, Noah made a promise to himself. He would find Mia, even if it meant confronting the darkness that had claimed her. Little did he know, the woods had already begun to whisper his name. Noah tightened his jacket against the biting wind and glanced back at Sarah. Her hands trembled as she clutched a flashlight, her wide eyes darting nervously toward the edge of the forest. "You don't have to come," he said, though his own voice wavered slightly. "No," Sarah replied, shaking her head. "I can't let you go in there alone." The two stood at the tree line, the looming forest alive with the rustling of leaves and the occasional low groan of bending branches. The thick canopy overhead allowed only slivers of moonlight to break through, casting eerie patterns on the ground. It was as if the forest itself was watching them, waiting. Noah turned on his flashlight, the narrow beam piercing the suffocating darkness ahead. "Mia!" he called, his voice echoing unnaturally. The sound carried farther than it should have, almost as if the forest had swallowed it and sent it spiraling back in distorted fragments. They moved cautiously, the crunch of leaves underfoot unnervingly loud in the unnatural silence that surrounded them. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of their throats. Shadows danced along the edges of their flashlight beams, shapes that seemed to shift and move just beyond sight. After what felt like hours, they came across something unusual, a clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling well surrounded by an overgrowth of ivy and moss. Sarah gasped and pointed toward the base of the well. There, half buried in the dirt, was Mia's scarf. Noah's chest tightened as he picked up the scarf. It was damp and cold, as though it had been lying there for days. But Mia had only disappeared that afternoon. "She was here," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and dread. Sarah shined her flashlight into the well, but its depths were impenetrable. "What if she fell in?" she whispered. Noah leaned over the edge, the damp stone chilling his hands. He called out her name again, his voice echoing into the void. But instead of silence, a low, guttural sound rose from the depths. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was a deep, resonant groan that sent icy fingers crawling up their spines. "We should go," Sarah said, stepping back. "This isn't right, Noah. Something's wrong here." Before he could respond, the ground beneath them quaked ever so slightly, as though the earth itself was breathing. The trees around the clearing seemed to shudder, their branches groaning like twisted fingers reaching toward them. And then they saw it, something emerging from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. It was indistinct, almost fluid, a mass of darkness that seemed to ripple and shift like smoke given form. Two faint, glowing eyes flickered within it, fixed directly on them. "Noah," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "What is that?" Noah couldn't answer. He couldn't move. His legs felt like lead, his heart hammering wildly in his chest as the figure began to glide toward them, its presence freezing the very air around it. As the creature drew closer, a faint, distant voice echoed through the forest, a voice that sounded eerily like Mia's. "Noah, help me." But the voice wasn't coming from the clearing. It was coming from the well. The voice was faint, yet unmistakable. "Noah, help me." Mia's cry echoed from the depths of the well, fragile and desperate. Noah's heart lurched. He dropped to his knees, gripping the edge of the ancient stone. "Mia!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. He shined his flashlight down again, but the beam seemed swallowed by the oppressive darkness within. Sarah tugged at his arm. "Noah, don't. We need help. We can't do this alone." But Noah barely heard her. Every fiber of his being was focused on the well and the faint voice calling his name. "She's down there. I have to get her." The shadowy figure at the edge of the clearing stirred, its glowing eyes narrowing. It stopped moving toward them, as though waiting, observing. The air grew colder, biting at their skin, and a faint hum filled the clearing, low and bone-deep. Sarah's voice was sharp with fear. "We have to leave. That thing, it's not letting us go." Noah ignored her, leaning further into the well. "Mia, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" His voice trembled, every syllable weighted with urgency. A faint reply came back, twisted and distorted. "Noah, don't let it." The words faded and the voice warped, turning into a low, guttural growl that didn't sound like Mia anymore. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, a deep rumble reverberating through the forest. Sarah screamed, and Noah barely caught himself from falling into the well. The shadows around the clearing grew darker, almost alive, as if feeding on their fear. The figure at the clearing's edge began to move again, gliding closer. Its form remained indistinct, a writhing mass of darkness with no discernible shape except for those glowing eyes. But now, faint whispers emanated from it, hundreds of overlapping voices, each filled with pain and malice. "Noah," Sarah choked out, clutching his sleeve. "If we stay here, we're going to die." Noah shook his head, still staring at the well. "I can't leave her." Before Sarah could argue further, a piercing scream erupted from within the well, so loud and raw, it made them both clap their hands over their ears. It wasn't Mia, it was something else, something inhuman. Then the whisper stopped. The figure halted, just a few feet away now, and the forest fell into an eerie silence. And then the voice came again from the well, soft, almost gentle. "Noah, please, come closer." But this time, Noah felt it, a subtle, malicious undertone beneath the words, like something mimicking Mia's voice. A cold dread crept over him as he realized the truth. Whatever was in that well wasn't his sister. "Noah!" Sarah's panicked scream snapped him out of his trance. The shadowy figure lunged forward, its amorphous form stretching toward them like a tidal wave of darkness. Acting on pure instinct, Noah grabbed Sarah's hand, and the two of them bolted back toward the forest. The path they'd taken to the clearing seemed to have changed, the trees closing in unnaturally, their branches reaching like claws. Behind them, the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps pursued them, along with the guttural whispers that grew louder with every step. "Noah!" Sarah cried. "It's right behind us." He didn't dare look back. The forest around them twisted and shifted, the ground uneven and unfamiliar. It felt alive, pulling them deeper into its grasp. The flashlight in Noah's hand began to flicker, the beam sputtering in and out until it failed entirely. And then, just as the whispers reached their crescendo, everything stopped. The footsteps, the shadows, the eerie hum, it all vanished. Noah and Sarah found themselves in a clearing, but not the one with the well. This one was larger, with an old decrepit cabin standing in the center. The windows were shattered and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Noah, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. What is this place? Noah didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the cabin. From one of the broken windows, he swore he saw a face staring back at him. It was Mia, or something that looked like her. Noah froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure in the window was unmistakably Mia, or at least it had her face. But something was off. Her expression was blank, her eyes wide and unblinking, as though she were staring through him rather than at him. Mia, he called, his voice cracking with desperation. He took a step toward the cabin, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Noah, don't, she whispered. That's not her. Look at her. Really look at her. Noah hesitated, his gaze locking on the figure again. That's when he noticed it. Mia's reflection didn't match the faint movements of the wind outside. Her hair didn't shift with the breeze. Her outline seemed distorted, and her skin, pale and waxy, almost glowed in the darkness. A shiver coursed through him, but he couldn't bring himself to turn away. What if it is her? He murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door creaked open, revealing a gaping void of darkness. The sound was excruciatingly slow, as if the hinges themselves were groaning in protest. Then came a sound, a faint, wet slapping noise like bare feet on damp wood. Noah tightened his grip on the flashlight, even though it had stopped working, and stepped forward. Mia, he called again. The figure in the window vanished. Noah, please, Sarah begged, tugging on his arm. Something's wrong with this place. We shouldn't be here. But he couldn't stop. He had to know. Each step toward the cabin felt heavier, like the very ground was trying to drag him down. The air grew colder, and the metallic tang from earlier returned, stronger now, filling his nose and mouth until he could taste it. They reached the porch, its wooden boards rotted and sagging. The interior of the cabin was impossibly dark, swallowing up the faint moonlight from outside. Mia? Noah's voice was shaky now, almost a whisper. A faint sound echoed back, a soft, childlike giggle, but it was wrong, as though it was layered with something deeper, darker. It sent an icy chill racing down his spine. Sarah whimpered, That's not Mia, Noah. Please, let's just go. But Noah stepped inside, pulling Sarah with him. The air was thick, suffocating, and the smell of decay hit them like a wall. The cabin's interior was empty, no furniture, no belongings, just four walls stained with black streaks that oozed like tar. The giggle came again, louder this time, and it seemed to echo from every direction. Where are you? Noah demanded, his voice echoing in the oppressive silence. A sudden thud from above made them both jump. The ceiling groaned, and a slow, black, deliberate creak followed, as if someone or something was walking across the floorboards above. Sarah clutched Noah's arm. We have to leave. Now. But Noah couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on the staircase in the corner of the room, the steps leading up into darkness. Another thud, then another. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just at the top of the stairs. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, a pale hand emerged from the shadows at the top of the staircase. It gripped the banister, long and thin, the fingers too many joints, too unnaturally long. Noah felt Sarah trembling beside him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The hand moved, pulling the rest of the figure into view. It was Mia, or at least something wearing her face. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, her eyes vacant and hollow, her mouth stretched into a grotesque, too-wide smile. Noah, the figure said, its voice a haunting mimicry of his sister's. You found me. And then it began to descend the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. Noah's legs felt rooted to the floor as the figure descended the stairs, each step producing an agonizing creak that echoed through the cabin. Its movements were unnatural, jerky and deliberate, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Noah, the thing whispered again, tilting its head at an impossible angle. You're here to save me, right? Sarah whimpered, clutching Noah's arm tighter. That's not her, she whispered. It's not Mia. Noah's mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't obey. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the thing that wore his sister's face. Her features seemed wrong now, subtly shifting, the smile too wide, the eyes too empty. Mia, he croaked, his voice barely audible. The figure stopped midway down the staircase, its head snapping upright with a sickening crack. It grinned wider, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. Come closer, Noah, it said, its voice soft and melodic, yet dripping with malice. Noah, please. Sarah begged, tears streaming down her face. She tugged at him, but he didn't move. The thing stepped off the staircase, its feet barely touching the floor as it glided toward them. The air around it grew colder, the smell of decay so strong now that it made Noah gag. "Noah," it whispered again, stopping just a few feet away. "You promised you'd always protect me." The words struck something deep within him, a memory from years ago. He and Mia standing in the woods as children, frightened by strange noises in the trees. He had held her hand and promised her that nothing would ever hurt her as long as he was there. "Mia," he said again, his voice trembling. But Sarah wasn't having it. With a burst of courage, she grabbed Noah's hand and yanked him backward. "That's not her!" she screamed. "Look at its eyes, Noah. Look." He did, and in that moment the illusion shattered. The hollow darkness in the creature's eyes began to shift, revealing swirling shapes, faces, dozens of them. They were distorted, screaming, trapped within the depths of its gaze. One of them looked like Mia, her mouth frozen in a silent cry for help. The thing's grin faltered, its head twitching as though struggling to maintain its form. "Don't listen to her," it growled, its voice deepening, becoming guttural and monstrous. "She's lying to you, Noah." The floor beneath them began to tremble, the walls groaning as black ooze seeped from every crack and corner. The cabin felt alive, pulsing with a dark, malevolent energy. "Run!" Sarah screamed, pulling Noah toward the door. The thing shrieked, an ear-splitting sound that made their ears ring and the walls vibrate. Its form began to contort, limbs stretching and twisting as it lunged toward them. Noah snapped out of his daze and bolted for the door with Sarah. Behind them, the creature's guttural growls mixed with the sound of splintering wood and cracking bones as it gave chase. They burst out of the cabin, the night air hitting them like a slap to the face. The forest was alive with noise now, trees creaking, whispers in the wind, and a strange, rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But the thing didn't stop. It followed, its elongated limbs propelling it forward like a spider, its movements a horrifying blur. "This way!" Sarah yelled, dragging Noah toward a narrow path that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The ground beneath their feet was slick with mud, and the pounding noise grew louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat echoing in the earth. As they ran, Noah risked a glance back. The creature had stopped at the edge of the path, its distorted form writhing as if something unseen was holding it back. For a moment, it simply stared at them, its glowing eyes filled with rage. Then it smiled. The sound of Mia's voice echoed through the forest again, soft and desperate. "Noah, please, come back." But this time, he didn't stop. He gripped Sarah's hand tightly, his chest heaving as they plunged deeper into the woods, the whispers of the forest growing louder with every step. The trees closed in around Noah and Sarah as they ran, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a chaotic, unintelligible chorus. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, twisting and shifting to keep them trapped. "Noah," Sarah gasped, struggling to keep up. "We're going in circles. This path. Just keep moving," Noah barked, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. His lungs burned, his legs screamed in protest, but the memory of the creature's face, the swirling, trapped souls in its eyes, spurred him forward. The pounding heartbeat beneath their feet grew stronger, almost drowning out the whispers. The ground seemed to pulse with it, each thud making the earth tremble slightly. Suddenly, the path veered sharply, leading them to another clearing. But this one was unlike anything they'd seen before. At the center stood a massive, gnarled tree, its bark blackened and twisted. Its roots sprawled out like veins, curling into the earth and disappearing into darkness. Strange symbols were carved into the trunk, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. Hanging from the branches were dozens of objects, tattered dolls, rusted chains, and cracked mirrors that reflected only shadows. Sarah froze, her breath hitching. "What is this place?" Noah didn't answer. His eyes were drawn to the base of the tree, where something glimmered in the faint light. He stepped closer, his heart sinking when he realized what it was. Mia's bracelet. He picked it up, the cold metal sending a shiver through him. The charm, her favorite, a small silver moon, was smeared with what looked like dried blood. "She was here," he whispered, his voice trembling. Sarah grabbed his arm. "We need to leave, now." Before Noah could respond, the whispers stopped. The silence was sudden and absolute, pressing down on them like a weight. And then came the laughter. It started as a low chuckle, deep and guttural, echoing from somewhere unseen. It grew louder, more deranged, until it surrounded them completely. The tree's branches creaked and groaned, twisting unnaturally as the laughter continued. Noah. The voice was unmistakably Mia's, but it carried that same malevolent undertone as before. "You're so close. Come to me." Noah spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The laughter abruptly stopped, replaced by the sound of rustling leaves. And then he saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadows between the trees, their forms translucent and glowing faintly. They were human-shaped but wrong, faces twisted in anguish, their bodies flickering like old film reels. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths moving silently as if screaming, though no sound escaped. Sarah backed away, her voice trembling. "What are they?" Noah shook his head, too terrified to speak. The figures began to close in, their movements slow but deliberate. The air grew colder, frost forming on the ground beneath their feet. "Noah," one of the figures whispered. It was Mia's voice again, but it came from the wrong direction, behind him. He spun around and saw her, or something that looked like her, standing at the base of the tree. She was pale and gaunt, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "Please," she begged, reaching out to him. "Help me. I'm trapped." "Noah, don't!" Sarah shouted, but her voice seemed distant, muffled. Noah's heart waged war with his mind. He knew it couldn't be her, not really, but the sight of his sister, so fragile and scared, broke him. "Mia," he whispered, taking a step toward her. The instant his foot touched the roots of the tree, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. The translucent figures screamed, their silent cries suddenly bursting into a cacophony of wails. The tree's symbols glowed brighter, and its branches reached down as if alive, curling toward Noah. Mia's figure flickered, her face twisting into something monstrous, a wide, jagged grin with teeth too sharp, her eyes black and void-like. "Noah!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The roots surged upward, wrapping around his ankles and pulling him toward the tree. The ground split open at its base, revealing a yawning chasm of darkness, from which faint, agonized screams echoed. As Noah struggled against the roots, he felt Sarah's hands on him, pulling with all her strength. "Hold on!" she cried. But the tree fought back, its branches reaching for her, slashing through the air with vicious speed. One of them grazed her arm, drawing blood, but she didn't let go. "Noah," the thing that wore Mia's face, hissed, its voice distorted and filled with malice. "You can't leave me. You promised." The ground trembled again, and the chasm widened, threatening to swallow them both. In that moment, Noah realized they were standing on the threshold of something far worse than death. The roots tightened around Noah's ankles, dragging him inch by inch toward the chasm beneath the tree. He clawed at the ground, his fingers scraping against the dirt, but the pull was relentless. "Noah!" Sarah shouted, her voice raw with desperation. She wrapped her arms around his torso, planting her feet against the writhing roots as she pulled with every ounce of strength she had. Above them, the tree groaned, its branches thrashing wildly. The symbols on its trunk pulsed with light, casting eerie shadows that danced across the clearing. The figures encircling them screamed louder, their faces contorted with torment, their flickering forms growing closer. The thing that resembled Mia stood at the edge of the chasm, watching with a twisted grin. "Let go," it cooed, its voice syrupy and mocking. "You can't save him. He belongs to me now." "No, he doesn't," Sarah yelled, tightening her grip. "You won't take him." The creature tilted its head, its black eyes narrowing. "You're stubborn," it hissed, its voice deepening. "Just like he is, but you'll fail as you always do." Noah felt the ground beneath him shift, the edges of the chasm crumbling. The screams from below grew louder, a deafening cacophony of agony and despair. He turned his head to look at Sarah, his face pale with fear. "Sarah," he choked out, "you have to let me go." "No," she screamed, shaking her head violently. "I won't." "If you don't," his voice cracked, "it'll take you too." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't loosen her grip. "I'm not leaving you, Noah. Not now, not ever." The tree reacted to her defiance. Its roots lashed out, one of them wrapping around Sarah's leg and yanking her off balance. She fell with a cry, but still clung to Noah, refusing to let him slip away. The creature let out a guttural laugh, its distorted face twisting with delight. Such loyalty, it sneered. So beautiful, so tragic. Noah felt the roots pulling harder, the chasm's dark energy enveloping him. His body was slipping, the void beneath him impossibly cold, as though it were draining the very warmth from his soul. And then, through the noise, came another voice. Noah, Sarah. It was faint, but unmistakably Mia's. Her real voice, filled with fear and sorrow, not the mocking tone of the creature. Both siblings froze. Mia? Noah gasped, his heart pounding. The creature's grin faltered, and it snarled, its black eyes darting around the clearing. No, it hissed. She's mine! The voice came again, louder now. I'm here! Help me! Noah turned his head toward the chasm. For the briefest moment, he thought he saw her. A flicker of her face in the darkness, her hand reaching out toward him. It was her, and she was trapped, surrounded by the same swirling, tortured faces he'd seen in the creature's eyes. With a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed one of the roots around his ankles and pulled with all his strength. Let her go, he shouted. The tree recoiled as though in pain, its roots loosening slightly. Sarah seized the moment, freeing her leg and grabbing a large branch from the ground. With a fierce cry, she swung it at the roots, striking them repeatedly until they began to retreat. The chasm quaked, its edges splintering further. The creature shrieked, its form distorting as it lunged toward them. You won't take her, it bellowed, its voice a deep, inhuman roar. But Sarah didn't stop. She struck the glowing symbols on the tree, each impact causing the light to flicker and dim. The roots writhed violently, pulling away from Noah as the tree let out an ear-splitting groan. No, the creature screamed, its body unraveling into tendrils of shadow. In that moment, Noah scrambled to his feet, grabbing Sarah's hand. The siblings ran from the tree, the ground beneath them trembling as the chasm began to collapse in on itself. Behind them, the creature let out one final, anguished scream before it was consumed by the darkness. The tree's branches twisted and cracked, its trunk splitting down the middle as the glowing symbols faded completely. They didn't stop running until they were deep into the forest, the eerie silence pressing down on them like a heavy weight. Only when they were certain the tree and the creature were far behind did they collapse onto the ground, gasping for air. Mia, Noah whispered, his voice shaking. She's still in there. Sarah looked at him, her face pale and streaked with tears. We'll get her back, she said, though her voice was filled with doubt. We have to. But as they sat there in the suffocating silence, the faint sound of laughter echoed through the trees. The laughter faded, leaving Noah and Sarah in heavy silence. Exhausted, they leaned against a tree, trying to process what had just happened. We need to go back for her, Noah said firmly, gripping Mia's blood-smeared bracelet. That thing, it's not over, Sarah whispered, glancing nervously around the dark woods. Before they could stand, a searing pain shot through Noah's wrist. He gasped, yanking up his sleeve to reveal a strange black mark etching itself into his skin. The symbol resembled the ones carved into the tree. Noah, Sarah's voice trembled as she pointed. The mark on his wrist began to glow faintly, and the forest around them responded. Shadows stirred, whispers rose, and the air grew colder. The mark pulsed like a heartbeat. With each pulse, a faint vision of Mia appeared before them, trapped, crying, and surrounded by the chasm's screaming souls. She's calling us, Noah murmured, his voice hollow. Sarah grabbed his hand. It's a trap. If we go back, we might not escape again. We don't have a choice, Noah said, meeting her terrified gaze. She's still alive, and I'll die before I leave her behind. The forest seemed to shift, a narrow, winding path opening up before them. The mark on Noah's wrist glowed brighter, tugging him forward like a beacon. And with no other choice, they stepped onto the path, plunging deeper into the darkness. The path led them to another clearing, where a stone altar stood beneath a canopy of skeletal trees. Around it, faint, ghostly figures loomed, watching in silence. Noah's mark throbbed painfully as he approached the altar, the vision of Mia flickering again. She was screaming now, her face pale and desperate. A voice echoed from the shadows, low and guttural. You seek to save her? The air grew thick, and a figure emerged, a hooded entity, its face obscured, its hands twisted and clawed. She is bound by a debt, it rasped. Her freedom requires payment. What payment? Noah demanded, his fists clenched. The figure chuckled darkly. A life for a life. One of you must take her place in the void." Sarah froze, her face pale with horror. "No, there has to be another way." "There is none," the entity hissed. "Decide, or all three shall be lost." Noah stared at the altar, his heart pounding. The weight of the choice crushed him, but Mia's cries echoed in his mind. Before he could speak, Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "Take me!" "Sarah, no!" Noah shouted, grabbing her arm. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "You've always protected us, Noah. Let me protect her this time." The hooded figure grinned, its clawed hand outstretched towards Sarah. The forest began to tremble, the shadows closing in as the bargain was sealed. "No!" Noah screamed, pulling Sarah back with all his strength. The hooded figure snarled, its outstretched hand now radiating a dark energy that wrapped around them both. "The bargain is made!" it bellowed, its voice shaking the ground. But Noah wasn't ready to let go. He shoved Sarah behind him, raising his marked wrist toward the figure. "Take me instead," he shouted. The figure paused, its empty gaze fixed on him. "You cannot change what's been agreed upon." "Then take us both," Noah roared. The mark on his wrist flared, its light piercing the shadows. The forest seemed to recoil, the ghostly figures wailing as the glow intensified. Sarah grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face. "Don't do this!" But Noah only smiled sadly. "It's my turn to protect both of you." The light erupted from his mark, engulfing the altar, the figure, and the entire clearing. For a moment, everything was silent. Time seemed to freeze. When the light faded, Noah was gone. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. But then she heard it, a faint, familiar voice. "Mia," she whispered, looking up. Mia stood before her, trembling but alive, her face streaked with tears. "Sarah," she choked out, collapsing into her sister's arms. The forest was still now, the whispers silenced, the shadows receded. But Noah's absence hung heavy in the air, his sacrifice etched into Sarah's soul. As they stumbled away from the clearing, the wind carried a final whisper, soft and resolute. "I'll always protect you."